folks, and welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name is Dan Lizette. Thank you guys very much for taking a little bit of time to listen this week. I've got a great episode. I hope you've enjoyed some of the recent conversations. Last week, I got a lot of good feedback from my conversation with Joe Richmond from Radio Diaries, and I'm really excited to bring back another person in sort of that public radio / podcast space that I think is doing phenomenal work, and he's doing so many different things, and it was a real privilege that he agreed to come and talk to me today. Alex Kapelman is the host and producer of Pitch, as well as the editorial director of Millennial, and so many other different things in the podcasting and public radio space that I'm really excited to talk about. So, Alex, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you having me on. And one quick thing, sorry to do this, but it's actually pronounced Kapelman.
No, that's good. Kapelman is good because I tend to read it like Brian Kapelman.
Oh, yeah.
Previous guest and another podcast host.
Oh, really? He was on your show? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, way back when.
Guy who's currently out of a job, I think.
Is he?
Well, they just shut Grantland down.
Oh, he left Greatland. He's with Slate.
Oh,
he's been with Slate for several months now, and actually, I think his real work right now is he's been working on a show for Showtime, Billions, coming out next year.
Oh, wow. Okay, I need to get more up on I have like the public radio space podcast stuff like down pat, but I got to spread my I don't know what I'm about to say.
The public the entertainment industry, yeah. I think Brian is mostly.
Sure.
Well, Alex Kapelman, and I'm glad we got the name straight because I imagine other people have done what I've done. For folks not familiar with you, tell them a little bit about your background, your previous history, kind of leading up into all this public radio podcasting stuff.
Sure. Do you want me to go into like my kind of like origin story or?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So I'm from New York. I grew up in New York, went to college in Maine. And all throughout like the first 22 years of my life, I barely listened to public radio. It was like only like Sunday mornings when my parents were listening to Jonathan Schwartz on WNYC. He has a show called, I think it's called Sundays with Sinatra. That was like my public radio understanding. Like public radio was like car talk and then like this like old guy who just plays Sinatra music. And that's what I thought it was. Then I was dating someone the year after I graduated college, and she was like, you know what? I think you'd like a show called This American Life. It's a radio show. And I was like, I don't really listen to the radio. She's like, no, trust me, you'd really like it. And I listened to one episode and I was like, holy shit. Like, this is incredible. And was like hooked instantly. And just plowed through their archives, ended up like listening to everything else on like the iTunes, top, 10 or 20, like, WTF, Radio Lab, like Things You Should Know or Stuff You Missed in History Class, like those, basically everything that was in the top 10, top 20 in like 2010 it would have been at this point. And then like also like I started thinking more and more that like I could be doing this. Like this is the career that I want to be doing, because I was kind of in like a sort of post-college existential funk type of thing. And so I just like saw on the This American Life website that there was like a tab that said make radio. And so they had a bunch of resources about how to make radio on the website. And I just like plowed through all those, like read the comic book, just plowed through Transom articles. I went on YouTube and watched tons of stuff with like Ira Glass, and basically just like listened to How Sound with Rob Rosenthal, who now teaches at the Transom Story Workshop, where I ended up going. But I did all of that, and then as I was about to like start my first piece, I was like, you know what? I'm actually just going to become a lawyer instead. Like I'll never be able to make it in radio. Like never. It's just like everyone is so good. It's an impossible dream. And I took the LSAT. I got a job as a paralegal in Boston at a management side employment firm. And like after about a month, I was like, I need to quit this job. Like this is terrible. I hate everything. I don't want to be a lawyer. Like I wanted to be a lawyer to do like civil rights stuff. My grandfather was a civil rights lawyer, and he worked on a bunch of really interesting cases. And I'm pretty passionate about social justice issues. And so I wanted to kind of, be a civil rights lawyer, and it really interested me. And then I realized what a lawyer did and was like, nope, I am out. So at that point I still wasn't like, oh, it's going to be radio. It's going to be radio. But I went on a trip to Spain in March of that year, that year from September to June that I was like a paralegal, and I basically listened to a piece by Whitney Jones, who's now my co-producer on Pitch, and it was a second piece ever that I produced for the Transitory Workshop. And I was like, whoa, this is an incredible piece. Like, if this guy can do it on a second piece, like, I can do it too. So, resolved then and there to get into public radio. And I started just like networking my ass off, just like going like to anyone who I could, possibly knew anyone in radio, and just like asking them, who they knew, if I could talk to them. And, those people introduced me to other people, and so on and so forth, until I got connected to Soundcheck on WNYC, which is a show that's no longer on the air, but it's this music talk show essentially. So it was really a great show, and ended up, I was like kind of exactly the person who they were looking for at the time in terms of the internship. So I applied for the internship and I got it, and I don't know how deep you want to go in this, but like we're already pretty deep. But essentially, like, I got really, really lucky, and someone left, and I ended up being able to, get like a temp job at WNYC, and with, after 2 months of interning there, which is like insane. Like, that is the luckiest, crazy stuff, because people intern for a year, 2 years, 3 years, before they get, the designation of per diem, which is like temp. And started working for other shows, and then just kept there's in New York City, there's this big public radio, independent producer scene. And I kept running into Whitney, who I was a huge fan of, and he knew that I worked at Soundcheck. We decided to have a beer one day, and then we hatched Pitch. We both had this idea for the show kind of at the same time, and we hatched Pitch and we launched it. And just to kind of sum up the last year and a half or so, I ended up going to the Transitory Workshop. I started a podcast consulting business recently after the whole podcast boom, and now I'm just working on Pitch, doing the consulting thing, and talking to you.
Wow, right up to today.
Right up to today. So yeah.
So a lot's to deconstruct there, and a couple of things I'd like to get into and highlight some of the things. You mentioned when you sort of left the lawyering effort and decided to get into this, that you started to talk to everybody you could, and this, that, and the other. I've heard from other people, and curious what your perspective was, that the independent or public radio or even podcasting communities tend to be super receptive and helpful, and some of the nicest people you can ever meet. Was that a similar experience for you, that people were willing to kind of take you by the arm and lead you to kind of what you needed to do?
Absolutely. And for me, like, that was one of the biggest draws of this career. Like, most everyone, like maybe 99% of people in this industry that I've encountered, at least in the part of the industry that I'm working in, is just like, everyone's just like the nicest, like most generous person ever. Like, people were so willing to give me time, and everyone's just so generous and nice and helpful, and generally very, very approachable. Like, what I tell people who are trying to get into the industry, or like, and amongst many other things, like, I tell them, like, if you like a piece, or you're a big fan of a producer, like, find their email and email them, and say, like, that's what I did with a bunch of people when I was trying to get into the industry. Is like, I'd be like, this is a public radio fan letter or whatever. And I would be like, oh my God, I love this story. Like, how did you, do this technique? Like, or why did you choose to interview this person? Or, just like actual questions I had about the piece. And people would get back to me. Sometimes I was able to take them out for a coffee, or, whatever. Like, I'm more of a naturally outgoing person. And so I think I have that going for me. But like, and it's very scary at first to just be like, oh my God, I like totally love, ex-producer, and then to send them an email, just like, it's really scary at first. But people are super receptive for the most part, and are generally up to chat. And like, it's just really great. I love it. I love everyone in the industry. It's great.
So you mentioned making the jump from the internship to the temp job at WNYC, and categorized as luck, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. But, as some people like to say, luck is, what is it, the expression, the intersection of hard work and opportunity, something to that effect.
Right.
So there had to be something there in addition to luck. For somebody else who might want to attempt to travel a similar path, what do you think somebody needs to do to put themselves in the best position to hopefully be as fortunate as you were in those early days?
That's a great question. I think it's funny, like when I was getting into the industry, like, and networking with people and talking with people, basically they would tell me, and this is 2011 at this point, they would basically say, like, look, there's two ways to get into public radio. One, you just apply to a bunch of jobs at small stations and, get like a newsroom job somewhere. And just kind of work your way up from like Kalamazoo to like, different stations, like slowly working your way up until you get to a bigger station. And then like, hopefully your chops are so good and you're getting a name for yourself and, you end up at a bigger show. You end up at a Radio Lab or This American Life after like 5, 10, 15, 20 years of doing this stuff. So there was that. And then the other thing was to like go get an internship at WNYC or get an internship at WBEZ or, BUR or, KCRW or BGO or something like that. One of the big stations, one of the big cities. And then you get another internship there and then you get another internship there. And then maybe after a year and a half, you'll be able to temp. And then once you temp for a year, like then maybe someone will get pregnant. And you'll fill in for them, and then you fill in for them for a while, and then like maybe a job will come up that you apply to, and like you won't get, and then maybe another job will come up to that you apply to and won't get, and then it's like 2 or 3 years in, and then you get an entry level job at WNYC or something like that, and then you work your way up through WNYC. Those were the two tracks that I was told were the ways to get into radio, but things have completely changed over the past 1, 2, 3, 4 years, like. Where people like Megan Tan from Millennial are able to just make their thing, and if it's good and you put a lot of hard work into it, and you put a little bit of work into getting it noticed as well, like that's a really, really big thing. Like working at a station is really important training and really good. But, by going off and doing stuff yourself, like, you don't have to go to music school to start a band, and I think that's kind of what we're moving towards right now. So the biggest piece of advice that I give people now is to start your own thing, and to work really hard at it and try to make people pay attention to it. Because if your name is out there, it doesn't matter if your name is out there as, a reporter, in, some station, some small station. Like you're going to get more traction probably these days, at least right now, like producing something really good that people are paying attention to in terms of a podcast.
In your own thing is Pitch. Tell folks a little bit about the show that haven't subscribed to it, that this is the first time they're hearing about it. How'd you get the idea and what is this all about? Sure.
Well, okay. So Pitch, I have to say, is the hardest thing to explain that I've ever had to explain to anyone. It's a show about music. But whenever I say it's a show about music, people are like, oh, so it's like All Songs Considered. You just play some music and you tell us like what's good. And we're just like, no, well, it's more just like 99% Invisible for music, or like This American Life, but for music. And they're like, oh, so it's like Song Exploder. And we're just like, no. So it's like, we've worked really, really hard on trying to figure out how to describe it. And we've basically failed. I have over the weekend, I have a tagline that I'm going to try out on you now. And it's completely first draft. So I'm just going to try this out on you right now. So it is a sound-rich narrative podcast where we do in-depth, ambitious reporting on big ideas in music. And it'll make you learn new things and will blow your mind. So that's the first pass.
Yeah. I like the last part.
Yeah.
It'll blow your mind.
Sure, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I'm looking at one on the website now. This must have been the previous version. Pitch is a narrative podcast about music. We make intimate stories that get to the heart of why we listen to music, how we experience, and what we're actually hearing when we hit play.
Right,
but you don't like that. You think it's up for revision.
What does that mean? I don't think it means anything. I think at the time it was something that we really liked, and we spent a really long time thinking about it, like way too much time thinking about it, and it's just so hard to describe. And actually, if anyone has any ideas, like this is something we're probably going to be doing. We're probably going to be soliciting ideas from people about how to describe our show. But if anyone has any ideas, like I'm, Alex@pitchpodcast.org. My ears are open.
All right, I have a reputation, Alex, as the ideas guy on some of my previous episodes. So I'm going to just top of my head, no prep for this. Here's something that's short. You can try to expand on it, or you can tell me it's terrible because it probably is. How about this? The stories behind the sound of the music we love.
So I like that idea. That plays into this is just workshopping on your your podcast.
No, this is great.
So the thing that is flagged for me is that, like, when you think music we love, people are like, oh, I love, like, Led Zeppelin. So we're going to be talking about like how Led Zeppelin made Led Zeppelin 4 or something like that. Like it's the thing about the podcast is that it's so.
How about change you love to music you should know? Oh,
well, but then that implies curation as well. Sorry, I don't mean to be like just
no.
You're throwing.
No, this is great.
Ideas. There are no bad ideas in the brainstorm. No bad ideas in the brainstorm. I guess the point is, like, the reason why we started the podcast, to more answer your question, is, there's a lot of really good music journalism out there. There's also a lot of really bad music journalism out there. But all the good music journalism and all the bad music journalism tends to be like curation. Like, hey, like, check out this band. Like, we like it. You'll probably like it too. Or like, hey, this band came by and we talked to them about their album. Or like, I spent a day with Rihanna. And a lot of that is really, really good. And we didn't want to, we knew the space was crowded. And we said, we'll leave, that stuff to the people who do it really, really well. And we want to talk about kind of the things about music that aren't talked about but are still hugely important and hugely, affect the way that we all experience music. So why is dancing banned in New York City for the most part? Like, in New York City clubs, you're not really allowed to dance. Like, a lot of people dance illegally, or there are clubs that say, like, please no dancing. Or like, why does the iPhone text notification make me think of the Sloop John B, of the Beach Boys version of Sloop John B every single time I hear it? Or, like, what's the deal with copyright law? And we do, like, deep dives into those things in ways that are very sound rich, and we do it in a narrative way. And so, that doesn't necessarily, or we haven't yet figured out a way to describe that in one sentence, but, like, that's essentially that's our challenge, to figure out how to describe what we do in that way. It's hard.
Well, and anybody who hasn't tried out Pitch, I think the easiest way to find out what it is just to start listening to it. These are not super long episodes, right? Clocking in, 15 to 25 on average, maybe, in length?
Yeah, anywhere between like 10 and like, probably on average, it's probably like 15, 17 minutes.
Yeah, and it's super, you have brought on other people. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is someone now who is helping you with some of the field interviewing and started their own sort of storytelling as well.
Yeah, Ellen Mayer, who is just an unbelievably smart and amazing producer. She's 23, 1 year out of college, and I met her when she was interning for Studio 360, and I was temping at WNYC. We just like knew that she was super into music, and saw, we were friends on Facebook, and saw one day that she posted about her thesis on Facebook. And the name of her thesis was like, like in academia or like any book title, you have to have like name and then a colon and then like three things after that. Right? Her thesis was like Jay-Z, and then I forget the first part of it, but the second part was it was like Jay-Z, neoliberalism, and the American dream. And it was like an honors thesis. And I was like, well, look at that. And so I read a little bit of it and I was like, this is incredible. She's super smart. Like, let's bring her on. And from the beginning, like, it's like, she's not our intern. Like, she is very much a third producer on the show, like, and puts in equal amount of work, equal input, equal creative whatever. Like, she's, flat with us, with me and Whitney in this show. So like, she's, the episode she produces, she produced like I would produce an episode, or like Whitney would produce an episode. When Whitney and I have drafts, she'll add input, editorial input. Like, we're all there together, and she's added just a huge amount. I mean, okay, so the show is started by two white dudes who are 3 years apart. We're both millennials. Whitney's like 31. I'm 28, and we're both straight white dudes. And that's not, there's a lot of podcasts out there that are just like two dudes talking into mics. And, like, as hard as we can try to integrate different perspectives, it's much easier to do when you actually have a woman on your team, or, someone who thinks about these issues deeply as well. So she's added, just from that perspective, she's been super huge for us. But she's also just really smart and really good. And I know is going to like be making a lot of noise in public radio. She actually just got a job with Harkin, which is it used to be Curious Nation. Jennifer Brandel started the show Curious City at WPEZ, and she's like trying to bring this really interesting platform to media organizations all around the world. And Ellen just got a job as a community manager there. She's smart. She's going to go places. She's the best.
Yeah. I think maybe you may recall, but and listeners who hopefully have now hit subscribed, and I would suggest you guys start all the way back at the beginning with Pitch. You highlighted that this is our new addition to the team here at Pitch, and this is her first story, and then she kind of goes. And I was thinking to myself, if you hadn't done that, I don't know that anyone would have recognized it as a first effort, because you're right, she kind of slipstreamed right into what we as listeners had come to expect from Pitch, and now you guys are 3 seasons in. And so it fit well, and I can see from a listener perspective how you feel she fits so well into the team and what you guys are doing, because I think she was a great addition. Yeah,
and she also, like, she was an intern at Curious City. She was an intern at, Studio 360. Like, she had done work previous to this, so she wasn't a total noob.
Right.
But yeah, that piece was great. Above and beyond what a first piece for Pitch should be.
Excellent. And what's the listener reaction been like to Pitch so far?
Pretty positive, I guess. In terms of what?
Well, I mean, what are the feedback you're hearing? Are you guys hearing good things? Are you satisfied with the reception? I know that from the website there has been what seems to be a lot of great feedback on how people are enjoying things.
Yeah. I mean, we've gotten a lot of we have an interesting conundrum right now, because we have a ton of really great press. Critics seem to really like our show, which is awesome. But our numbers they're respectable, but they're not like super huge. So, one of our conundrums is like trying to figure out how to grow the show. I think one of the things that we need to do a little bit better is try to involve our audience a little bit more, and try to engage our audience a little bit more to get that feedback, to make sure they're engaged, because our listeners are important to us. Like, we make the show for them, like, and we want to deliver, what stuff, we want to deliver a good show for them. But yeah, so we've gotten a lot of the engagement from them has been like, oh my God, like I used to, I hear Sloop John B on the iPhone now too, or like, like I ride the subway and I hear Maria or whatever. Like, a lot of it is like reacting with the content, which has been fun.
So you mentioned the idea of growth, and so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that are a little controversial maybe, or things maybe you don't want to discuss, and that's perfectly okay. But given your background and your involvement in so many public radio stations and your past and what have you, one might say, have you considered or are you considering the concept of rolling Pitch under WNYC umbrella, or a Radiotopia or something like that would obviously kind of raise up visibility and numbers? Or are we going back to your original thought, which was this is our thing and we don't want to associate that way?
So the most important thing for us is, I mean, it is our thing. We want to keep full ownership of our show. We want to do the show the way we want to do it. Like we're not in this to get bought by anyone. You know, we're not in it to like to just like make it a big thing. You know, we're in it because we really love making the project and we really love what the show is. You know, that being said, like, you know, we've spoken to networks. We want to seize an opportunity that is right for both us and the network, or you know, whoever is going to fund us. So, you know, nothing is off the table for sure. But we're also looking at ways where we can exist independently. Like, you know, like I think for us as a show, we're at a point where we haven't really made money off of it. We've mostly lost money. We might break even after like we had a sponsor. We had a sponsor for like 5 episodes. But we haven't really like, you know, sat out and like seeked out ways to make money or, you know, worked on that, because like we are doing this essentially in our spare time. And for us, the most important thing is making a product that's really good. And our show is just so production intensive and heavy and just takes so much research and reporting. It's just endless hours, which we love, for the most part. But yeah, like we want to make sure like so I guess the point is like now we're looking at opportunities and we want to take the time to try to figure out how we can monetize either independently or through a network or whatever. Like no options off the table, as long as we're able to keep making the thing that we want to make and we retain full ownership of the show.
Well, I'm a big fan of Pitch. I believe I've listened to the whole catalog. I didn't find it originally, but I think I found it about 6 months ago, thereabouts, and then went through and caught all up. And folks, if you're not subscribing to Pitch, it's another one, as I mentioned, one of those low weight additions to your subscription list. It's not going to bog you down with a 2-hour episode every day or anything like that. It's one of those kind of, I call, event listening podcasts, because when it does pop in, you're going to want to check it out. I've loved a lot of the work that you guys, all 3 of you, have put in so far, and I look forward to what's next with Pitch. I want to kind of transition a little bit, Alex, talk about these so many other things you do, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there to talk about. You mentioned your work with Megan Tan and Millennial, and Megan was a previous guest here on the podcast Digest. Can you tell folks a little bit about how you're working with Megan and what your role is in the show? Sure.
Well, so maybe I'll start with just my friendship with Megan first. Like, she was also another person who I met at WNYC when she was interning for Radiolab. And we just kind of stayed in touch. And, you know, when she was in that like funk about like, you know, how do I get into this? How do I get into this field? You know, she talked to a ton of people, and I was just one of the people who she talked to. And she kind of told me about the idea of Millennial, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you know, let me know if that happens. And kind of like offered, because I think Megan is just, you know, like Ellen, she's like incredibly smart, incredibly tenacious, and like, you know, if she puts her mind to something, she's going to do it and do it well. And so I was like, oh, okay, like let's, you know, let me know if this happens. I'm happy to help. And so at first it started off as just like she would send me drafts of scripts, and I would be like, okay, just like maybe think differently about, you know, about this section, or like, you know, move around the parts a little bit, or, you know, like set up the stakes a little bit better, just kind of like lightweight notes. And then as it got, you know, as she, you know, started doing more and more stuff, I started, you know, being a little bit more intensive. Just like, I'm essentially her editor, what I would call it, you know, like in any, what, you know, at a public radio show, I would be called her editor probably, where like she basically sends me an outline of something, and then a first draft of a script, a second draft of a script, maybe a third draft of a script, depending on the episode, and then a first audio draft. And then, you know, I give her feedback on stuff along the way that, you know, running the gamut from like how is the structure of the piece? Like there have been pieces that, you know, have, you know, that we've restructured, you know, a lot of her stuff is just like kind of pretty great out the door. But there are times when like, you know, you just need a second ear on it, and then you're like, oh, great. Okay. That should be first. That should be second, or whatever. You know, everything from that to like setting up the stakes to like, just like, hey, like, I was listening with earbuds in, and I noticed that like the room tone ends for like a half a second at like 13:55. Like, make sure to clean that up. Like little tiny things like that as well. But I'm essentially part of a larger team because there are a couple other people who work on it too, and she gets feedback from a lot of other people. But Megan obviously is the main guiding person who's doing everything and putting it all together, and it's her very, very, very much her show.
Having a participatory role, let's call it an editor style role in this show, kind of being along for the ride, Millennial has exploded in so many ways. What's it been like to kind of be a part of this, and from being sort of involved, what's your reaction been like all along to see how well this show's done?
It's been really great. It's been really, really lovely. I don't ever expect something to. The space is so crowded that it's so hard to get someone's attention that you have to make something really good, and that's I think how you're going to get. That's the backbone of how you're going to get people buzzing about it. And I knew that Megan would be able to do something good, but the show has touched on something in a lot of people that they really empathize with, and it's been really interesting to see that part of it. So like people are really interested in Megan and her story and her, her trying to get into radio. And Megan is really sincere and exposes a lot about herself and about her hopes and dreams, which is incredibly hard, like way harder than you could ever imagine, or than most people could ever imagine. And so to see that hard work pay off, and for her to be so successful, has been just really gratifying for me. Just as like someone who's like, oh yeah, I edited a little bit on that episode. Like, it feels good.
Do you think that's why Megan's doing so well? When I talked to her, I sort of had this conversation with her that I think it's that honesty, that authenticity, that people end up almost Truman Show style rooting for her as she's kind of documenting everything in her real life. That's sort of my opinion on why everybody's taken to her. What's yours? Yeah,
well, what we talk about on the show a lot is like Megan as a character and her journey. And so, when we're editing the show, we have that frame of reference in mind. Like, Megan is a character. This is a show. And we think of it almost, or at least I think of it as almost like a TV show, and the arc is, will she or won't she, right? One of the reasons why Serial did so well, I think, is that it's so easy to grasp the concept. Is like, did Adnan do it, right? It's just this central question that everything is driving towards. One of the reasons, obviously. And so with Megan, I think I think it's her story, and she's telling it very, very well. And part of that is the fact that she's very honest and open. So we get a little bit of that voyeurism, for sure, which is a big part of it. But I think it's so many other factors. Like her writing for radio is really good. Like, she's established her voice really well. She, when you listen, like, you feel like you're in good hands with her. She's really great at setting the scene. She's funny, and she just does so many things so well. I don't want to peg it down to one thing aside from her just being a really fucking good producer.
Right. She's going to be one of those ones, I have a feeling, when I look back, 5 years from now, hey, I had her on my show once before she became, the second coming of, some giant megastar. Yeah. Once she talked to little old me.
No,
I have a feeling.
For sure. And when she started doing it, I actually had a little bit of FOMO. I was like, I don't want to miss out on someone who's this good. Like, it wasn't out of the goodness of my heart completely that I wanted to help her. I think she's great, and I wanted to be a part of something really cool. And I'm like, it feels really great to be part of a project that's doing really well and that I think is really, really, really great work.
I want to, Alex, talk about some of kind of broader industry or the medium topics with you. But before I do that, I want to kind of let folks know some recent developments that may not know about you that sort of will justify your opinion on some of these broad topics I'd like to talk about, because you've recently been elected to the board of directors for the Association of Independents on Radio, correct?
Correct.
tell folks a little bit, what is it air? Is that commonly referred to as air media?
Yeah, air. We call it air. It's basically the closest thing that like independent producers have to a union. It's not at all like a union. You pay yearly dues. They're pretty low, relatively low. But it's essentially like a network of talent where it's a network of talent, and air helps the talent get jobs, connect with each other. There's a listserv. It's just kind of like a group of people who are watching your back, and also like help facilitating really interesting things like local lore, which sets like producers up with local stations, and then gets them funding to make really interesting projects that wouldn't otherwise happen. And there's a lot of really great stuff there. They do a lot of great programs. It's just like this really great organization that serves independent producers.
And does that extend to podcasting as well?
Yes, it does. And when I ran for the board, I ran on a platform of three things essentially. Podcasts, kind of like how do we get independent producers to be more podcast literate, like from just like understanding like how do you put up an RSS feed, like all the way to like how do you market a podcast, like how does it help what you want to do, like should people even be considering it? There's that. I ran on money in terms of like there are so many corporations and nonprofits and organizations trying to explore this field right now, and public radio is public radio is kind of like made public radio wages are pretty cheap right now, and I think a lot of people are getting very, very, very much underpaid, and so I think this is a moment to seize to try to get us paid what we deserve to get paid. And then the third thing I ran on was diversity. I think this is a conversation that has been increasingly had in public radio and in other spaces, and it's important. And the conversation is really important for sure. And one of the things that I want to do is, AIR has also been focused on diversity and helping to diversify the space in real concrete ways. And I want to continue that and expand it as much as possible, because it takes real action. It takes people actually trying in order to diversify the space, which is a thing that's sorely needed. So those are the three things I ran on.
And it's funny, on my little tiny show here, Alex, I've sort of touched on all three of those at one time or another. So I'm very interested to hear your opinion on each and every one of those. When you talk about podcasting, a few episodes ago, I had Rob McGinley Myers from Anxious Machine and The Herd as a guest, and we did a recommendations episode. But before that, I always have a discussion topic. And the topic that we talked about was kind of this back and forth conversation going on between a public radio person who is familiar with that industry and somebody who was more associated with podcasting, and sort of talking about how there is this idea out there now that public radio needs to do some evolution, or the podcasting / excellent content production will sort of leave them by, that radio numbers keep going down in terms of listenership or stagnating, or even the CPM rates and ads and podcasting versus radio are changing. And I'm just curious your perspective in terms of how you see public radio coexisting with podcasting. Is it a coexistence, or is there some evolution that needs to happen? What are your thoughts?
Well, the term public radio is an interesting term. If you take it literally, it's like, I guess you could call it like things that are funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and podcasting itself is basically just like on-demand electronic audio or something, right? It's like a medium, like a radio wave would be a medium. So it's not like, I don't see it as one industry versus another, or two industries that are interacting. I see them as two kind of separate things. And public radio can podcast, and so that's just to clarify kind of how I think about it. Right. But in terms of actually getting to your question, I think we're seeing, for me, the important thing is that people are empowered to make really great shit. Like, the reason why This American Life is so popular is because it's so good. The reason why Serial is so popular is because it's so good. The reason why Radiolab is so popular is because it's so good. And traditionally, public radio has been able to, be the thing that has funded and enabled those spaces. But now with the success of things like Death, Sex, and Money, or Note to Self, or other podcast firsts shows. I think you see, places like WNYC understanding that podcasting could be another avenue for getting really great shit out there. And so, I don't know if there's necessarily like a, invest in podcasts, excuse me, and invest in podcasts or die like kind of thing. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. I don't think it's super imminent. But I think that like enabling your talent to do great things will drive listenership. And if that's what you're looking for, if that's how you measure success, then I think, you wherever you work, or wherever whatever you run, like, you need to strongly consider podcasts as a way to enable your talent to do great things.
That would make sense to me. I think one of the things that I always think about is that I'm like you. I don't necessarily consider one dying and the other evolving. Where I look at it is access, right? Once people can hit a button on their car's dashboard and instead of AM, FM, and have a third option there that says podcasts, if we see that day, are people going to start making that choice? The old traditional radio style or dial or boombox or stereo system is not as prevalent today. Now people are going through their phones or going through Bluetooth speakers. And if those have access to podcasts, is the exposure going to start having a shift in listenership? I know for me, I don't listen to the radio anymore because I have podcasts in my car, on my phone all the time. And that doesn't mean that there aren't great things happening. I'm just getting it through the podcast. That's sort of what I'm wondering, is that once that changes, is there going to be an issue for those great public radio stations we've been talking about if they're not up and moving and running and doing those great things over here too?
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's what Gimlet is betting on, right? They're betting that like once things are easy enough, that like you'll choose the things that are really great. You'll choose if you have access to HBO for free. Why would you watch The King of Queens? If you have
I like The King of Queens. That was pretty good.
Sorry, that was just on the top of my mind because he apparently was at the Mets game last night. Yeah, I mean, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, no, and that's, I was kind of proving your point in a little different way. When you talk about great stuff, I agree with you. The great stuff will always win. I mean, that's why Netflix is having such a success story with a lot of their original programming. They are going up against the big guys and producing their own stuff, and voila, people are flocking to it, and it's winning awards and so on and so forth. Yeah. And I'm just curious if there'll be something similar in that. Nobody can predict the future, but it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Your second point you talked about with money, monetization of podcasts has been, you mentioned earlier that you're lucky if you break even with pitch. And I can imagine 99% of podcasters out there hearing this, and a lot of my audience are podcasters, are right there with you. Probably never made a red cent or little prospects to do so. What is your take on current monetization that's in place right now with sort of host-read ads and or sponsorships, or now you've got Mark Maron with Howl Premium doing the Netflix of podcasting? This seems like everybody's trying so many different things. What are some of your thoughts on that monetization in podcasting? Yeah,
I kind of align with what Matt Lieber and Alex Bloomberg think about in terms of Gimlet. Like, essentially, like public radio. It's interesting that I said that term. Essentially, like a place like Gimlet comes from this public radio space where people are just used to getting it for free, and people get podcasts for free. You can get a podcast for free. Like, unless you're a super fan, you're not going to pay for a Howl, or unless there's something just so unbelievably amazing behind that paywall, like that you need to listen to, you're not going to pay for it. Like, maybe there's like 2 or 3 shows like that for me. that I would maybe pay for like $5 a month or something like that just to listen to that one show. But that's not. I don't see that being. I don't see that being the model that's going to win out. I see a freemium model winning out. Like, I guess that's, to be fair, that's actually what Hal is doing, and what Gimlet wants to do. Like, pay an extra $5 a month, and you get pilots or a T-shirt or whatever. In terms of other monetization stuff, like I think a lot about what Gimlet's doing with advertising. Like, you listen to Gimlet ads, and like some of the ads are really good ads. Yeah. They're just really good pieces of content in general. Like the fact that I'm calling an ad content is absurd for me. I'm very much one of those people who has ad blocker plus, and like I can't watch Hulu because I don't want to watch stupid ads every 30 seconds, even if it is Seinfeld, and even if it is like basically the same as like watching on TV. But like I think the future is in figuring out how to make those ads more enjoyable and more swallowable, and that's honestly where journalism is going in general with native advertising. So I think like when Starlee Kine gets 30 seconds of children trying to say cinnamon and failing miserably, and it's hilarious and cute, like that's something I want to hear. I've listened to that ad like 4 or 5 times just because I think it's so cute.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I believe Alex Bloomberg in the most recent mini season of Startup talks about that with his wife on some of the ads. And what's funny is, and again, I don't mean to keep hearkening back to previous guests here, but that's what I was saying. How all your topics there is things I've talked about. I had Alex Goldman from Reply All as a guest way back in April, and him and I talked about the ads on Reply All because I told them then I love the ads, just like you said. I mean, the way that they pull them off, they execute. Not only are they memorable, but they're almost unskippable. Alec talks about in the most recent episode of Startup that he received feedback that people will skip back because they may have missed an ad, and that's, if you can pull that off with a listenership, I mean that's advertising gold. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean it's the thing about Reply All is that like Alex is amazing, PJ is amazing. The team that they have with Shruti Panamaneri and Tim Howard, and maybe there's 1 or 2 people now who are there, but like they have a team of like really, really amazing producers who know how to make great audio content. And essentially what you're paying for, I don't know where Gimlet is moving now. I haven't listened to that episode yet, so don't tell me any spoilers.
I won't.
I don't know. I don't know if they're bringing Nazanin in to just be like, have her be the head or whatever. But like, when you put really great audio people into a room, like they essentially become like a production company or like an ad agency. So you're paying not just for the spot, which is what a live read used to be. Kind of, you're paying for the spot and for that host voice, but like now you're paying for something that's like truly enjoyable, that will really up your brand affinity, or whatever you want to call it. And I mean, that's where I think things are interesting right now. Who knows how long it's going to last? Definitely not me. I have no idea. And I know that Gimlet is definitely exploring other avenues for monetization. And in general, in any business, like having as many, lines of revenue coming in as possible is like what you want to be doing. But like, I think this advertising thing is interesting, and I hope it lasts for longer because CPM rates are pretty high right now.
Exactly right. Yeah. Podcasters should find a way to keep that up. That would help everybody. That's for sure.
Yeah, we're going to do our best.
And just to touch on your last, topic there in terms of your conversation for board of directors with AIR is diversity, and that's another one I've talked about when I had Helen Zaltzman on as a previous guest. We talked a lot about women in podcasting, and what was funny is that and I think I've said this before on the show, with my previous guest list, I remember telling my wife at one point that I was looking at some of my previous episodes and realizing that inadvertently I'd accidentally run off like 6 or 7 men in a row, and I said I've got to change that, and ever since I made a concerted effort, which was probably about from episode 30 on, and we're on episode 65 here today, I have almost a 50-50 split, which is funny because I didn't really put in extra effort to bring on some of the great women podcasters and hosts that I've had, but just make sure that I put out a fair representation. And I think, honestly, my show's been all the better for it. And you mentioned, with what you guys are doing with Pitch as well, the benefits there. How bad of a problem do you think podcasting has right now? Has it gotten better, or is it just my perception that it has in the last couple of years?
I think it's bad right now. I think it's really bad. Uh, I think it's getting better in terms of like people are thinking about it more. Like it's, when you have something like Public Radio Voice, getting on BuzzFeed, or Public Radio Voice, like which is a Transom article talking about like how, like he's trying to sound like a public radio person, quote unquote, would sound. And then that goes kind of viral. Like that's important. You have Stephanie Fu writing an article on Transom about how to diversify radio, and then that makes the public radio rounds. Like that's important. You have someone like you have people like Tracy in Heaven, from the BuzzFeed podcast Another Round, making a really, really successful podcast. And they're two Black women. And they got Hillary Clinton on their podcast. Because they're reaching different audiences. And I mean, they're also probably reaching the same audiences. Like I listen to that show. I'm not who you might expect to listen to that show. But it's really good. They're really good. There are a lot of people out there who are doing really great stuff and who could be doing really great stuff. However, I think the real problem, I won't say the real problem. One of the big problems is that internships in public radio are almost completely unpaid. There are a few exceptions. I know Reply All actually is paying their intern. The Moth pays their intern, I think. But like, at certain stations, interns are paid $8 a day or $12 a day or something like that. And when you're getting paid $8 a day or $12 a day, like who's going to be able to afford that? Like someone who works completely 100% in their off time, maybe if they can get a job and if they can even try to afford that, especially like in New York City, which is crazy, or just like, people who are able to borrow money from their parents. Like if you're not paying interns, you're excluding a whole bunch of people. You're basically like bringing like rich white people into the fold at a higher rate. And in addition, like, and I gotta say, like, I shouldn't be the voice of this. Like I'm not like super well versed. It's something I feel very passionate about. But like I don't want to be like, the champion of diversity necessarily. I think there are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me and who think about this a lot more that that would probably have smarter things to say than me. But it is something I feel passionate about. But the other thing is like, when you're sitting in a room full of white producers, let me phrase it this way. Did you listen to the WTF with Wyatt Cenac?
I'm not sure if I've heard that one.
He was on the Daily Show. He's a Black comedian who was a writer and a correspondent on the Daily Show. And there was essentially a moment where there was a sketch that Jon Stewart did, and he did, I think, like an impression of a Black guy that was like that made Wyatt Cenac uncomfortable. He brought it up in a meeting, and like that caused this whole blow up with Jon Stewart. And then, they talk about, Mark Maron and Wyatt Cenac talk about like how hard it is to be the only, quote unquote, like the only one in the room, that you have to basically like signify, or you have to stand in for like every Black person or every whatever ethnicity you are, for a bunch of, in front of a bunch of white people, who are, who probably want, who's probably sympathize with you, but like, come from a different perspective, so might be taken aback or, whatever. Like, I mean, I as a white guy, I never had that experience before, so I'm not the right person to represent it for sure. But like, I can imagine that that's really hard. And so like when there's so few people of color in radio right now, like you have to make a concerted effort to recruit people and to bring in great talent and to make sure that their voices are heard. And if people aren't feeling that, they're going to leave. And someone actually tweeted at me the other day. I got into a Twitter conversation with someone who was like, yeah, I worked in public radio for a little bit, but I didn't like it. It was too hard to be, it was too hard as a black person. And so I left.
Wow, that is sad. That is sad, that's for sure. Well, I'm glad that you are bringing all of these important priorities to AIR, the Associated of Independents in Radio, and with your role now on the board of directors. And I appreciate your thoughts on all of these topics because I think they're all important, and I think they're all important to anyone who is a fan of podcasting or public radio. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today. I want everybody to know where to find your show and where to find all the great work you're doing. Can you let them know?
Sure, yeah. You can go to pitchpodcast.org or follow Pitch at HearPitch, HEAR Pitch. You can follow me at Alex Kapelman, ALEXKAP, as in Paul, ELMAN.
Alex Kapelman, thank you very much again for your time. Folks, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Podcast Digest. I'll be back again next week with another great guest. Until then, have a great week.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pod Digest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.